Captain James Mitchell was exhausted. He'd been awake for 26 hours straight, having just returned from Joint Base Langley Eustis after completing debrief sessions following his third deployment to Afghanistan. The military transport had landed at 4 a.m. He'd processed through customs and debriefing until noon, and now, at 12:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, all he wanted was a decent cup of coffee before driving home to his family. He was still in his army dress uniform, the one he'd worn for the formal homecoming ceremony on base. His captain's bars gleamed on his shoulders, and his Bronze Star medal ribbon was visible among the rows of decorations on his chest. He'd earned that Bronze Star leading his unit through an ambush in Kandahar, making split-second decisions that saved 11 lives while under direct fire. But right now, James wasn't thinking about medals or valor. He was thinking about coffee and maybe a sandwich. Miller's Coffee House was a small independent cafe in Virginia Beach, the kind of place that advertised community atmosphere and local ownership. James had never been there before, but he'd driven past it 100 times. It was 2 blocks from the base, convenient, and according to Google reviews, had excellent coffee. The cafe's interior was exactly what James expected: exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, a chalkboard menu with handwritten specials, and the rich aroma of fresh ground coffee beans. About a dozen customers sat at various tables, some working on laptops, others chatting over pastries. James approached the counter, where a man in his mid-50s stood behind the espresso machine. His name tag read, "Frank Miller, owner." He looked up as James approached, and his expression immediately shifted from neutral to suspicious. "Can I help you?" Frank's tone was not welcoming. "Yes, sir. I'd like a large black coffee and whatever sandwich you recommend. I've been traveling all morning and I'm about to fall asleep at the wheel." Frank didn't move to take his order. Instead, he looked James up and down, his gaze lingering on the uniform with what looked like distrust rather than respect. "We have a dress code here," Frank said. James blinked, confused. "I'm sorry? A dress code? No athletic wear, no work uniforms. This is a cafe, not a cafeteria." James looked down at his military dress uniform, then back at Frank. "Sir, this is my official military uniform. I just came from base. I don't care what it is. We have standards here. You'll need to leave." The cafe had gone quiet. Other customers were staring now, some looking shocked, others uncomfortable. A woman in business attire at a corner table pulled out her phone. James kept his voice calm and professional, the same tone he used to de-escalate tense situations in combat zones. "Sir, I'm an active duty army officer. I'm in proper military dress uniform. There's no health code or safety reason I can't be served. This is my establishment. I can refuse service to anyone, and I'm refusing you. Please leave." James felt a familiar knot in his stomach, the same one he'd felt countless times growing up black in America. The assumption that he was a threat, the immediate suspicion, the refusal to see him as a person, let alone as someone who'd spent the past 9 months serving his country. "Can you tell me why you're refusing service? Because I'd like to understand what dress code I'm violating." Frank's face reddened. "Are you arguing with me? I said leave. Now, I'm not arguing. I'm asking a legitimate question as a customer who." Frank picked up his phone from under the counter. "I'm calling the police. You're trespassing." A man at a nearby table stood up. He was older, maybe in his 70s, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap. "Frank, what the hell are you doing? This man is in uniform. He's a captain. Show some respect." "Stay out of this, Larry," Frank snapped. "This is my business." The woman who'd pulled out her phone earlier spoke up. "I'm recording this. Just so you know." Frank glared at her. "You can leave too if you don't like how I run my cafe." James raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Sir, I don't want any trouble. I'll leave. But I want you to know that I just returned from Afghanistan. I've been serving this country for 12 years, and I came in here in good faith, wanting to support a local business." "I don't care where you came from," Frank said. "You're not welcome here." James turned to leave, his body language still controlled and professional despite the humiliation. But as he reached the door, the Vietnam veteran Larry called out, "Captain, wait a minute." Larry approached James, his eyes glistening. "I want to thank you for your service, and I want to apologize for this treatment. This isn't what you fought for." James shook the man's hand. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Larry pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to James. I'm a reporter for the Virginia Beach Post, retired now, but I still have connections. If you're willing to tell your story, I think people should know what happened here." James looked at the card, then back at Frank Miller, who was watching from behind the counter with his arms crossed. "I'll think about it," James said. He left the cafe, got in his car, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. He was tired, hurt, and angry. But he was also a commissioned officer in the United States Army. He'd faced enemy fire with courage and composure. He could handle this. He pulled out his phone and called his wife Angela. "Baby, I'm on my way home, but something happened. I need to tell you about it." By the time James got home, Angela had already heard about the incident. The woman who'd been recording had posted the video on social media with the caption, "Local cafe owner refuses service to Army captain." Local cafe owner refuses service to Army captain. This is what our veterans come home to. The video had been shared 200 times in the first hour. By evening it had reached 10,000 shares. Local news stations were calling. Veterans organizations were expressing outrage. And someone had started a protest planned for the next morning outside Miller's coffee house. James watched the video with Angela and their 2 kids, 7-year-old Michael and 5-year-old Sarah. Seeing himself on screen in uniform, being told to leave while just trying to get coffee, was surreal and painful. "Daddy, why wouldn't that man give you coffee?" Sarah asked, her voice small and confused. James pulled her onto his lap, struggling with how to explain discrimination to a 5-year-old. "Sometimes people make judgments about others based on how they look instead of who they are. That man looked at me and made assumptions. He was wrong, but that's what happened." "Because you're black?" Michael asked. At 7, he was already learning these hard lessons. "I think so, son. Yes." Angela squeezed James's hand. "What do you want to do about this?" Larry called. So did the news. They want interviews. James was torn. Part of him wanted to just move on, put it behind him, not make a big deal. But another part knew that silence allowed discrimination to continue unchallenged. "I want to tell my story," he decided. "Not for revenge, but because if this happened to me, an officer in uniform, it's happening to other veterans, other people who can't fight back. Maybe speaking up prevents the next person from experiencing this." The next morning, James gave an interview to the Virginia Beach Post. He told his story calmly and factually, without exaggeration or embellishment. He described Frank Miller's refusal, the fake dress code, the threat to call police, and he explained how it felt to be treated this way after serving his country. "I've deployed 3 times, James said to the reporter. "I've led soldiers in combat. I've been shot at, mortared, and nearly blown up by an IED. I've made decisions that saved lives and decisions that still haunt me. And I came home to a country where a cafe owner looks at me in uniform and sees a threat instead of a person who served." He pulled out his Bronze Star. "This medal represents the day I ran into enemy fire to pull my injured soldier to safety. I earned this protecting American freedom, the freedom for Frank Miller to run his cafe, the freedom for him to speak his mind. But freedom also comes with responsibility, and refusing service to people based on their race, even when they're in military uniform, that's not American values, that's discrimination." The article published that afternoon with the headline, "Decorated Army Captain Denied Service at Local Cafe." It included James's military record, his Bronze Star citation, and testimony from the customers who'd witnessed the incident. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The protest outside Miller's coffee house that had started with 20 veterans grew to over 200 people by midday. They held signs, "Veterans deserve respect," "Service not discrimination," and "Bronze Star business owner." Local politicians issued statements condemning the incident. The city council member for the district called for an investigation, and most significantly, customers stopped going to Miller's. By the second day, the cafe was virtually empty. Frank Miller initially doubled down. He gave an interview claiming he'd been within his rights to refuse service, that he'd felt threatened, and that the military uniform wasn't appropriate for his establishment. He never explicitly mentioned race, but the subtext was clear to everyone watching. "I run a family-friendly cafe," Miller said. "I have the right to maintain the atmosphere I want. If someone makes me uncomfortable, I can ask them to leave." The interviewer pressed, "But Captain Mitchell is a decorated war hero. He was in proper uniform. What about him made you uncomfortable?" Miller fumbled for an answer. "It's not about him specifically, it's about my general policies. But you don't have a posted dress code, and you've served other customers in work uniforms. We have photos of construction workers, nurses in scrubs, even other military personnel in your cafe. Why was Captain Mitchell different?" Miller ended the interview abruptly. The backlash intensified. A deeper investigation revealed that this wasn't Miller's first incident. 3 years ago, a black family had complained about poor service and being seated in a back corner away from other customers. 2 years ago, a Latino teenager was accused of stealing, searched, and found to have a receipt for his purchase. Neither incident had received much attention at the time, but now they were being re-examined as part of a pattern. Veterans organizations called for a boycott. The American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars issued joint statements condemning the incident, and the coffee roaster that supplied Miller's beans publicly announced they were terminating their contract. 1 week after the incident, Frank Miller's Café had lost 70% of its business. His suppliers were dropping him, his insurance company was reviewing his policy, and the city was investigating whether his business license should be revoked. Miller finally issued an apology, posted on his cafe's social media page, "I deeply regret my interaction with Captain Mitchell. I reacted poorly and made a mistake. I have the utmost respect for our military and those who serve. I am sorry for any pain I caused." But the apology felt hollow, forced by business consequences rather than genuine remorse, and it came too late to stop the momentum of public anger. 2 weeks after the incident, Frank Miller announced he was selling the café. He cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. His discrimination had cost him his business. James watched all of this unfold with mixed feelings. He hadn't wanted to destroy someone's livelihood. He just wanted coffee and to be treated with basic dignity. But he also understood that there were consequences for discrimination, and sometimes those consequences were severe. 3 months later, the cafe reopened under new ownership. The new owners, a veteran-owned business collective, renamed it Heroes Haven Coffee. They dedicated a wall to local veterans, including a framed photo of James in uniform with his Bronze Star citation. They invited James to the grand reopening. He stood in the same spot where he'd been refused service and cut the ribbon on a cafe that now explicitly welcomed everyone, especially veterans. "This space was used to discriminate against people," James said during his speech. "Now it's a space that honors service and celebrates community. That's the America I fought for. That's the country I want my kids to inherit." A year after the incident, James was promoted to major and assigned to a teaching position at West Point. He used his experience with Frank Miller as a teaching moment for cadets, discussing leadership, dignity, and how to respond to injustice. "You will face discrimination in your careers," James told his class. "Maybe because of your race, your gender, your religion, and you'll have a choice in how to respond. You can stay silent and let it continue, or you can stand up, document what happened, and use your voice to create accountability." One cadet asked, "Sir, do you regret how the situation unfolded?" Miller lost his business. James considered the question carefully. "I regret that discrimination exists. I regret that I had to experience it after returning from deployment. But do I regret speaking up? No. Miller made a choice to refuse service. I made a choice to tell my story. The consequences of his actions aren't my responsibility. They're his." 5 years after the incident, James was a lieutenant colonel commanding a battalion. He'd deployed twice more, received additional decorations, and established himself as a rising star in the Army leadership. Frank Miller had left Virginia Beach, reportedly moving to a smaller town in rural Virginia. He never opened another business. Some reports suggested he'd found work in construction. Others heard he was unemployed, living on savings. James thought about Miller occasionally, wondering if the man had learned anything, or if he'd simply become bitter about the consequences of his own actions. But mostly, James focused on his family, his soldiers, and his mission. He'd served his country with honor for 15 years. He'd saved lives, led men and women in combat, and embodied the Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, and selfless service. One day of discrimination, however painful, couldn't define him. What defined him was how he responded with dignity, how he used his voice for accountability, and how he continued serving despite the hurt. And Heroes Haven Coffee, thriving under veteran ownership, served as a daily reminder that spaces of discrimination could be transformed into spaces of welcome, that individual acts of bias could spark collective movements for change, and that sometimes refusing to stay silent was the most powerful form of service. James's children grew up knowing their father's story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as an example of courage, dignity, and the importance of speaking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And every time they passed Heroes Haven Coffee, young Michael and Sarah would point and say, "That's where Daddy helped change things." Because sometimes, ordering a cup of coffee becomes an act of resistance. And sometimes, a decorated war hero's greatest battle isn't on a foreign battlefield, but in a small cafe in his hometown, fighting not with weapons, but with words, not with violence, but with the simple demand for dignity. That was the real heroism, not the medals on his chest, impressive as they were, but the courage to stand up and say, "I deserve better, we all deserve better, and I won't be silent while discrimination continues."
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.